I would like to now recognize Representative Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I would love to let you gentlemen just talk some here, but when we're bringing up operations like Naomi and MKUltra, there's Operation Mockingbird that was going on at the same time as MKUltra, and it really ties into what Congressman Burchett was talking about with radio waves, where we have these like a Venn diagram of individual people and the military casting a broader net. So you have the radio waves, computer activity, the Operation Mockingbird, the programming that is taking place. So what do you see in relation to what was happening then and what we are seeing now that could be types of the same kind of programs and even using direct energy weapons or the like? Mr. O'Neill, you can begin.
I would just like to say one thing. There was an objective outlined in the early proposals for MKUltra to do experimentation to see whether they could do mass conversion, convert entire populations. I think that had something to do with the France incident that you were talking about earlier. Again, today, it's all speculation, but back then, they were trying to use psychological means to see how you could influence people's thoughts. And Mockingbird played into that, which, if people don't know, that was where they had CIA assets or co-opted people in the media who would write basically propaganda and try to control the thoughts and beliefs of the population to what the CIA needed. And is it still going on today? I would be surprised if it wasn't.
Sure, I think we saw it even during COVID with all of the NIH funding that went to COVID and the Wuhan lab and then everything that came out of that, trying to make people believe in something that wasn't there. Dr. Kinzer, do you have anything on this?
I would say only that in the modern age, maybe radio waves and drugs are not necessary to control people's minds. We have such a great advertising, propaganda, press, social media collaboration that certain opinions are marginalized and real debate is frustrated because people are not given access to full amounts of information. So that's a way of controlling the minds of populations that doesn't even require sophisticated electronic or psychopharmacological means.
Anything else you'd like to add for our next 2 minutes here that we haven't? Maybe you have answers to questions we haven't asked.
I would just like to reiterate something that I said in response to your earlier question, and that is that there's a reason why conspiracy theories are so widespread in America. It has to do with the disassociation between what we say we are and do and what we really are and do. This has become more and more clear to more and more people. Therefore, they're suspicious of nefarious dealings by the U.S., and they're also suspicious of other things that aren't nefarious at all. But there's just this mentality that is created by the covert sphere. And that is what makes people realize that things that used to seem really far-fetched are not so far-fetched after all.
Yes, well, Congress, we create these agencies and we even provide their funding. We appropriate that funding, and then they come before us often and are too big to even answer simple questions that we have and be held to account. So it does cause for a lot of deceit, a lot of doubt in the American people, and certainly within us as members of Congress when these agencies refuse to answer to us, the branch of government that actually creates them and provides their funding. And then, of course, the American taxpayer whose money is being stolen to fund all of their programs and agencies. So I think that would be another reason how these conspiracy theories grow, because government has grown so big it won't answer to the people. Maybe they just think the people are too dumb to understand, but certainly we want to get answers to the people. And I appreciate you gentlemen for being here today. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Representative Boebert. Representative Burleson, do you have any further questions? Okay, I now recognize Representative Burleson for 5 minutes.
Mr. O'Neill, going back to Charles Manson and the Helter Skelter incident, can you explain how in the world someone who is an illiterate musician that seemed to be not exactly the brightest person somehow became a cult leader and was able to, inspire all of these individuals to do crazy things?
Unfortunately, I spent 20 years trying to find out how that happened, and what I was able to prove was that from the moment Manson was released from federal prison in 1967, he violated his parole, went to the Bay Area without permission, and was immediately put under the supervision of a federal parole officer who basically gave him leniency as he gathered his group of followers, gave them drugs, dominated them, turned them into more or less subservient robots who would do anything he said. All that happened under the watchful eye of a parole officer named Roger Smith, who was also doing drug research at the same clinic that Jolly West had set up his operation to recruit subjects. All the way until 1969, when Manson finally ordered the murders that he was later convicted of, he had been arrested repeatedly for escalating crimes, beginning with petty thievery, stealing cars, and then rape, attempted murder, drug possession. Each time, not only wasn't he prosecuted, his parole wasn't violated. So the federal government, in some capacity, enabled him to do what he did and flourish until these crimes happened. And in my book, I make a case, and it's a theoretical case, that it was part of an operation called Chaos, also with the CIA, that we haven't talked about today because it really doesn't have anything to do with drug research, but it was created to neutralize what the government believed was a revolution that was happening in America in the 60s, beginning with the anti-war movement and then the black militancy movement and the Panthers. So it's kind of a big stew of a cauldron of possibilities that Manson emerged from all that when I don't think he should have.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you have an individual, Jolly West, who was working with this parole officer. You think the parole officer was making the connection so that the drugs were then flowing through?
Well, the parole officer was at the same time he was supervising Manson's parole, running a research project called the Amphetamine Research Project out of that clinic, and that was studying amphetamines and violence and drugs and group behavior and gangs in the Bay Area. Again, I hate to speculate. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but when you see the tentacles that crossed paths with Manson when he got to Los Angeles as well, I believe that he was he was manipulated and at the very least given freedom to do what he did while he was being observed.
And then the same individual, Jolly West, ends up in Oklahoma, correct? So that's where was he operating out of Oklahoma during this time with Mr.
When he
Manson?
contracted with the CIA, he was at Lackland Air Force Base. He was the chief psychiatrist at the hospital, so he began his experiments there. A year after the letter that I quoted in my statement where he was describing what he wanted to do, a year later on July 3rd, 1954, a 3-year-old girl was abducted and found later in a gravel pit, murdered, and next to a car that had been abandoned. And the search party that found the little girl's body was approached by a man who was an airman at the base, and he asked them where he was and how he had gotten there. He was arrested for the murder and described by the military officers who had him in custody as being in a trance or dazed. He didn't have any drugs in his system. He didn't recognize his wife when she was brought to see him. And at his trial, where Jolly West was his advising psychiatrist who examined him,
Of course.
it emerged that he had actually been being treated at the hospital at Lackland in an experimental program to cure his chronic, debilitating migraine headaches, and he was executed 4 years later.
And then years later, he ends up volunteering to handle the Jack Ruby.
West does, yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So just before we wrap up, is it in your expert opinion that Jack Ruby and Manson were assets of the intelligence agencies specifically pertaining to MKUltra? Were they MKUltra victims?
Yeah, theoretically, Manson, I've never been able to prove absolutely. Jack Ruby, I believe, this is something else. The Warren Commission investigation on the Warren Commission was Alan Dulles, the former CIA director, who authorized and ran MKUltra until he was fired by President Kennedy. The liaison to the committee for the CIA, who handled the information coming from the CIA back and forth to the Warren Commission, was Richard Helms, who was a direct supervisor of Jolly West. They knew who West was. They knew that what West was capable of and what they had paid him to do and what he had reported to them that he could do, including inducing mental disorders in people. That was never disclosed to the commission as far as anyone knows. So I believe that West was put in there to keep Jack Ruby from telling his story.
Wow. In closing, I just want to thank you all for being here today, and we will be following up, Dr. Kinzer, on your request to fully redact. I'll be following up personally with the director of the CIA, the MKUltra files that we do have. Also, as I noted earlier, there will be more that will be declassified, specifically pertaining to newly found records that were located in what we were discussing earlier. I did also want to just state that, for the record, in regards to what statements were made earlier regarding the German government, we will also be following up on that. If there are indeed people that were victims of this that have been buried, we would like to know who those people are and who their families are as well, in order to correct the historical wrongdoings of this government. Without further ado, I would like to state that all members have 5 legislative days within to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses that will be then forwarded to them. If there are no further business without objection, the task force stands adjourned.